Gisbergen could join the Cup Series full-time in 2025, and Noah Gragson could either end up at RCR or Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a ton of paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Bricky Jr.'s 2024 Tylenol scheme that we'll see this weekend at Sonoma. The scheme looks alright in my opinion. Really glad to see that Tylenol is sponsoring Ricky Stenhouse Jr. this weekend. I think it's alright. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Sonoma. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Zane Smith's 2024 Centen WellCare scheme that we'll see this weekend at Sonoma. Not as big a fan of the color. I've never really been a big fan of this color. It's not that great. It's not my favorite. Mobley Zane can have a good run though this weekend. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chase Briscoe's 2024 Ford Performance Racing School scheme that we'll see this weekend at Sonoma. Scheme looks pretty good in my opinion. I've been a big fan of the Ford Performance schemes in the past. This one's no exception. It does look pretty solid. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Sonoma. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Justin Allgaier's 2024 Rev 1 brand scheme that we'll see this weekend at Sonoma. Scheme looks alright in my opinion. I think the colors mismatch a little bit, but I do love that there's multiple sponsors working with Justin Allgaier this weekend. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Priest's 2024 Camus Vineyard scheme that we'll see this weekend at Sonoma. I like the sponsorship and I like the paint schemes quite a bit. Solid looking car. Looking forward to on the racetrack this weekend at Sonoma Raceway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chase Elliott's 2024 Napa Gold Filter scheme that we'll see this weekend at Sonoma. The scheme's alright in my opinion. I've never been a massive fan of the Napa Gold Filter schemes. I like it when it runs at night. I'm not a big fan of this one running at day. It's okay. It's not amazing though. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is John Hunter Nemechek's 2024 Save Mart scheme that we'll see this weekend at Sonoma. I think his scheme looks okay in my opinion. Really cool to see a Save Mart is sponsoring John Hunter, but it's not the most best looking scheme, to be honest with you. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Eric Jones' 2024 Dollar Tree Harry Gann throwback scheme that we'll see this weekend at Sonoma. We've seen the scheme with John Hunter Nemechek. There's really nothing much different with this one, to be honest. It's interesting for sure. Pretty cool new sponsorship. I'm glad to see that Dollar Tree will continue their commitment with Eric Jones this weekend. Really good looking paint scheme. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Josh Bilicki. As it was announced on Monday that Josh Bilicki will drive the 92 for DGM Racing this weekend at Sonoma. Josh Bilicki's ran 5 or 6 races so far this year, a majority of them with DGM Racing, but of course he got the chance and opportunity to drive with JGR a week ago at Portland where he ran top 5 a majority of the event, but he unfortunately got caught up in some wrecks and incidents near the end of the race. Obviously, Josh is a really good road course racer. I think ultimately he's going to have a chance for top 20 this week because DGM's road course program is generally really, really good. I think he's got a good chance and opportunity to have a very solid run, and hopefully Josh Bilicki can have a good run this weekend at Sonoma Raceway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Built Bar. As it was reported by Bob Pockets with the lawsuit going on between Built Bar and NASCAR, that Built Bar apparently had agreed to pay $300,000 annually from 2022 to 2024. It sounds like that's how much sponsorship costs to be an official sponsor because they were the official, I think, candy bar or bar of NASCAR, and now because of the lawsuit going on, that is very, very interesting. So they would have had to pay $900,000 altogether because of the $300,000 annually. It's very, very interesting. Obviously, we kind of wonder how much sponsorship costs to be an official sponsor of the sport, but now we know how much it's going to cost for them to be an official sponsor. Very interesting stuff for sure, and kind of crazy to see that it's $300,000 annually to be a sponsor as long as this one. Very interesting stuff. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're unfortunately taking this episode to a sour note. As it was sadly announced that Parnelli Jones has unfortunately passed away at the age of 90 years old. Parnelli Jones was a trailblazer. He won multiple NASCAR Cup Series races, he won some big events, and he also won the Indy 500 in 1963. He's a legend of the motorsports. My prayers and condolences do go out to the Jones family during this time. It's a really, really sad time for them overall. Just really want to say, and once again, send my thoughts and condolences out to the Jones family at this current moment. Rest in peace, Parnelli Jones. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Sage Karam. As it was officially announced yesterday that Sage Karam will drive the 35 for Joey Gase Motorsports this weekend at Sonoma. Sage Karam has made select starts this year so far with Sam Hunt Racing in the 24 and 26 car, and has had some pretty solid and good performances going. And I think that while Joey Gase Motorsports is not a fast organization as a whole, I do think that Sage Karam could have a pretty good performance this weekend at Sonoma. He always gets the best out of the equipment, and I think he's got a good chance for top 20 or top 25, but obviously this car does have to qualify in, and unfortunately they were not able to get in with Frankie Muniz. I'm really glad to see Sage back in the Xfinity Series, though. I think he's going to do a really solid and good job, and looking forward to seeing him on the racetrack this weekend in Sonoma. I think he'll do a really good job this weekend, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Luca Ghiotto. As it was officially announced yesterday that Luca Ghiotto will drive the 51 for Dale Coyne Racing for 2 more races in 2024. He'll drive a Road America this weekend, and then he'll race at Laguna Seca, I believe, in a few weeks. Luca Ghiotto made his return to open wheel racing after a couple-year hiatus when he drove for Dale Coyne Racing in a few races, I believe, at Barber at the Indy Road Course. And honestly, he performed really solidly. I know he spun out at the end of the Indy GP, but was running inside a top 20 in that event. If I'm not mistaken, I think he finished in the top 20 at Barber Motorsports Park. I think Luca's got a chance for at least a top 20 for sure, while Dale Coyne Racing is not one of the fastest organizations in the world. I think Luca's done a really solid job in a few races he ran. So it's a really great opportunity for him. I think he's going to do a very solid job, and I'm glad to see he'll get the chance and opportunity to drive for Dale Coyne Racing once again for a few races. He could be a candidate to run full-time next year. We'll have to wait and see what happens if he gets that chance and opportunity to run full-time in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Detroit Grand Prix TV ratings. As it was reported by Adam Stern yesterday that USA averaged 608,000 viewers for IndyCar at Detroit. That is down from 1.049 million viewers, which is last year, of course, I believe was on NBC. And it's actually up, though, from the last time they ran a race on cable, which I think had 349,000 viewers when it was in Belle Isle in 2022. Basically, this is a drop of almost 90% of the viewership. Now, obviously, when you have it on USA, it's a cable network. Less people are going to tune into a cable network than they are to a broadcast. But obviously, with how bad the race was at Detroit, which the racing standards were not very great, I think that's one of the reasons why people didn't tune in. Plus, let's be real and honest, like I said, the race was not the most fantastic, and I think a lot of people went over to watch the Cup race at Gateway. Plus, Kyle Larson wasn't there, so that's another big thing to look at as well. It's really sad to see the ratings not go up, unfortunately, for this year, but again, am I really shocked? No, to be honest, I'm really not shocked and surprised, to be honest, because let's be honest, right? Oh, you always see a huge drop in viewership after the Indy 500. I feel like we need to start going to tracks like Michigan if we're going to want the ratings to go up. I think we need to start having conversations about that. Will they do that? I don't know at this point because the Detroit Grand Prix is expected to return next year, so we'll see what happens long term, but the ratings are not very good, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Will Brown. As Will Brown is getting his seat fitted and ready to go for his Cup Series debut this weekend at Sonoma Raceway. Currently drives for AAA Engineering in the Supercar Series, taking over for Shane Van Gisbergen, as Shane currently is full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series and likely will be in the Cup Series in 2025. Will Brown has been doing a really good job this year over there, and I think he's going to have a really good chance and opportunity to do very well this weekend with RCR. This is a really, really solid ride. I know RCR's had some bad performances so far this year, but I think Will Brown is a very talented driver, and I think he could be a surprise candidate to go to victory lane this weekend. Kyle Busch finished second last year at Sonoma. I know it's based off of strategy, but Kyle Busch's road course runs have been pretty good the last few years. So I think while Will Brown is not going to be contending for a win fully, I do think he could have a very solid run this weekend. I think it's a really great chance and opportunity, and I think he could have a very good run. So we'll see what ends up happening with Will Brown, see how he ends up doing. I know he's excited about his debut, and I think he could have a very solid and great run with RCR this weekend at Sonoma Raceway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Esteban Ocon. As it was officially confirmed on Monday morning that Esteban Ocon will leave Alpine at the end of 2024. Obviously, there's been a lot of drama going on with Esteban Ocon after what happened in the F1 race at Monaco. There was some contact between him and Pierre Gasly, and there was even talks and discussions that he was going to get pulled at this point early in the season and wasn't going to return. The big question is, where does Esteban Ocon go? There's a ride open up at Audi, but Carlos Sainz more than likely could end up there next year. I don't think Haas has any rides available at the moment, to be honest. So the question would be, where does Esteban Ocon go? He could go to Haas next year. That is definitely an option. But I really hope Esteban Ocon can find his feet going to next year, because Esteban Ocon, he is not a bad race car driver. The guy's got a win in F1, I think, 3 years ago, so he can absolutely drive. It's just that he did make a mistake, and there was tension, and they really didn't like working together very, very well. So it really didn't surprise or shock me to see this. A lot of people expected that there were some dramatic changes coming, and those dramatic changes did end up happening. So am I shocked? No, I'm not really surprised about this, but I really do hope that Esteban can find a place to go in 2025 in Formula 1, because I think he deserves to be in F1. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Anthony Alfredo. As it was announced on Monday that Anthony Alfredo will drive the 62 for Beer Motorsports in October at Talladega. Anthony Alfredo has made 1 or 2 starts so far at Beer Motorsports this season in the 62 car, and let's be honest, he's actually done a really good job. I think he made the Daytona 500, was the fastest open car in the event, and qualified as the fastest there, and also I believe finished in the top 5 with them at Talladega earlier this year. Now, he will not be running at Daytona because Parker Retzlaff will be making his NASCAR Cup Series debut. But I think Anthony is a very solid super speedway racer, and I think that Anthony is going to have a very solid and strong run with the team at Talladega really, really soon. So it's a great opportunity for Anthony, because I know he wants to eventually go back to Cup in the future. I think he's going to do a really excellent job. I'm looking forward to seeing him have the chance and opportunity to drive for this team once again. I think he'll do a great job, and I'm looking forward to seeing Anthony Alfredo getting back behind the wheel of the 62 car later this year with Beer Motorsports at Talladega. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Race Hub. As we officially got confirmation from NASCAR and Fox that Race Hub will air their final episode on June 11th, which is a week from yesterday. Unfortunately, this was confirmed by Kelly Crandall not too long ago that Race Hub will be shutting down. It is a really big shame. Race Hub has been the hub of news and reveal and paint schemes, among other things, over the course of the last 15 years. But obviously, we know that Fox has been cutting a lot of corners, which we're going to talk about them here in just a little bit. But they've been cutting a lot of corners, which is one of the reasons why Race Hub is sadly going away. But to be fair, there's a lot of these racing shows that are sadly going away, and they're all kind of going to the podcast side of things with the Happy Hour podcast, among other things. And that's one of the reasons why I think Race Hub is sadly going away. But at the same time, it is truly sad to see that Race Hub, a legendary show for many, many years, is sadly going to be going away at the end of the year. It's really disappointing to see, but once again, I'm not really shocked and surprised to see this. The final episode will air on June 11th. It's a 90-episode special episode, and it will take place on Tuesday, June 11th, which is 6 days from today. It sucks, but am I shocked? No, I'm really not shocked, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Sergio Perez. As it was officially announced yesterday that Sergio Perez has signed a multi-year contract extension with Red Bull that will go through the 2026 season. This has been very expected, as he was getting very close to signing an extension with Red Bull. I've seen some of the reaction on social media from people saying, why is he getting another chance and opportunity to drive for Red Bull? Well, Sergio Perez, I know he's had a couple bad weeks recently, but he's generally been doing a solid job this year in Formula 1. I know he's not been up to the level of Max Verstappen. He hasn't won a race in over a season, but I think that Sergio has done a solid job at points so far in 2024. And that's why he's getting this extension with Red Bull. Now, obviously, he is going to need to step it up to the plate. And let's be real, Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda, as much as those two drivers have had okay performances this year, they're not on the level of Sergio. And apparently Carlos Sainz and Max Verstappen still really don't like each other as much, which is one of the reasons why they're not working together next year. That's why the most logical choice and decision was going with Sergio Perez. I'm glad Sergio's back. I don't think Sergio's as bad of a driver as people make him out to be. He's not Max Verstappen, but you shouldn't expect him to be like Max Verstappen, right? I think people have way too high expectations on that front, in that aspect, and I think that's a good decision to bring Sergio Perez back, because personally, in my opinion, I don't think Sergio's a bad driver, and I think people clearly just want to hate on him for whatever reason, but again, F1 fans for you. Unfortunately, I think he's not a bad driver. I think he's a good driver. He's won F1 races, and he's generally been a really good second driver to Max Verstappen over the course of the last couple of seasons. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about NASCAR and NBC. As NASCAR NBC officially returns next week, which will kick off at Iowa Speedway, I believe, on June the 16th. Honestly, thank God. I think y'all know my frustrations with Fox, right? I have not been a massive and huge fan of Fox Sports this year. I think the commentary booth has been excellent. We'll talk about a commentator that will be returned to Fox more than likely here in just a little bit. But I am not a big fan of NASCAR and NBC. I'm not a big fan of NASCAR on Fox's coverage. I think that the Gateway coverage, which I'm going to be watching in just a little bit, for what I understand and know, the coverage was absolutely bad. And it was bad all weekend. The Xfinity coverage was not very good. They did a burnout. They did a commercial during SVG's Incredible Drift Burnout. They did commercial breaks, and they were like, oh, we're going to go to a commercial with one to go and come back at the final restart. And, of course, they missed a lot of the action. They missed the pyro, and it's just been frustrating to be someone who watches this sport, because while a lot of people go to the racetrack, millions of people are still watching at home. So you've got to put on at least somewhat good coverage for people to be very, very happy. And if your coverage is not very good, people are going to notice. Now, the biggest thing that's going to be changing for NBC, of course, is that Dale Jr. is no longer there this year. But obviously, Dale Jr. is going to Amazon and TNT. But I'm looking forward to NBC coming back. We've also got Lee Diffie joining and Jimmy Johnson joining for a couple races later this year as well, which I find to be very fun and really exciting. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens on that front and that aspect. But it is really good to see that NBC's coming back. So I think the coverage for NBC is generally going to be a lot better overall. So I'm glad to see that NBC will be coming back next week, because I think that it's going to be a much better coverage going forward, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Gateway TV ratings. As it was reported by Adam Stern and Fox Sports that FS1 averaged 2.459 million viewers for this weekend's race at Gateway. That is up 14% from 2023, which had 2.16 million viewers. Now, it's noted by Adam Stern that there was a lightning storm and a major thunderstorm that hit the area, and also Chase Elliott was back racing once again. I also think that there's some fans from IndyCar, though, that also tuned into this race. This is really, really huge. I believe that this is the biggest number that Gateway's got in the 3 years that this track has been around. To have nearly 2.5 million people tune in, and that's a really good for Fox, right? Because Fox has definitely had some down races this year in the ratings, but to see them jump up 14% from the previous year, that is a really, really huge and a really, really great jump for the sport as a whole. So I think this is a good, big win, honestly. I don't know what the key demo numbers are. I think it's like 15 or 20%, which is solid. I think 20-25% is kind of what NASCAR's targeting at this point, because you do need that younger audience if you're going to want fans to stick around long term. I love these numbers, though. I'm glad to see the ratings generally up for this event. I think 2.459 is a very, very solid and a pretty good number. And nonetheless, glad to see, once again, I'm very happy to see the numbers up. I'm glad to see TV ratings continue to go up in a sense. And I'm glad to see the numbers for Gateway are up this weekend. Again, when we talk about ratings, we want to talk about them in a positive light. And this is a very positive and really good thing to see. So once again, really good numbers for the weekend. Glad to see that the ratings are up for Gateway this weekend. Good to see F1 get some pretty good numbers, considering cable generally is down a lot more, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Fox Sports ratings. As it was reported by Adam Stern last night, that heading into this weekend's race at Sonoma, Fox says it's up 1% in NASCAR viewership, including the 500. A strong comeback because of the postponed Daytona 500, which had a drop of 27% in viewership. This is really, really good to see. I get that the number only being up 1% overall is not amazing, but especially because we need higher numbers for this year, because remember, we're going to be going to be the streaming side of things, which we are expecting that number of viewers is going to drop. We're probably going to attract a lot of younger fans going into the new TV deal, but we're also going to have a lot of those older fans that are not going to be able to tune in when we do go to streaming starting next season. I think this is a very, very good thing to see, that the ratings are up 1%. Obviously, I think there's going to be a lot of race on NBC when we go to NBC's portion next week. And obviously, I think it's going to be really cool to see the numbers hopefully go up going forward into the future. But I'm very happy to see this, that we're up 1% overall this year from last year. We had a pretty big drop last year. I think he had like a 5 or 6% drop. So to see that number go up 1%, obviously a lot of the Chase LA fans have come back, but also the racing product has generally been a lot better this year. So I think this is really, really great to see. I'm very happy about this, and it's just cool to see that at least the numbers for Fox Sports are up this year on FS1 and Fox in general. So again, it's really great to see. I'm very, very happy about this, and nonetheless, it's really cool and awesome to see that the ratings are generally up for Fox this year in 2024. Hopefully that number continues in Sonoma, but generally road course races do not get the best ratings overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Rodney Childers. As Rodney Childers has done media availabilities over the course of the last week or so, and he is hoping to be paired up with Josh Berry once again in 2025, wherever he ends up going. Rodney Childers and Josh Berry have worked together all year so far, and Rodney Childers, is no secret, is a massive and huge fan of Josh Berry. And they both have started to gel really well together. I know the last race at Gateway did not go very well for Josh Berry and Rodney Childers because unfortunately Josh had a flat tire going into turn number 3. But the previous 3 races, they had finishes in the top 10 and top 15. And I believe they're still inside the top 20 in points despite the tire failure they had and ended up finishing in last. They still also are leading the Rookie of the Year standings at the moment, which I predicted going into the season that they were going to be the Rookie of the Year because I think Rodney and Josh were going to do a very solid job. I consider that this has been a very successful pairing so far, and I truly do believe that these two should work together. Now, where are they likely going to end up in 2025? I think most likely it's going to be with Front Row Motorsports. We do know that Front Row is going to be a 3-car team in 2025, and I've linked Josh Berry over there considering the fact that I think this is going to be a package deal, because I think Rodney Childers is probably the most coveted free agent of everybody over at SHR with how great of a crew chief he really, really is. So I think that these two guys will end up going together over there in 2025. I think they'll work together next year because I do expect that both they really like working together, and I do think that both Rodney Childers and Josh Berry are going to work together in 2025 because like I mentioned, they love working together. They've done a really excellent and great job this year so far. They continue to improve. They continue to get better, and I think that both will end up being a package deal, and they're going to end up going over there in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Indianapolis test. Yesterday, Denny Hamlin, Kyle Busch, and Todd Gilliland, not Michael McDowell, were at doing a Brickyard test to get the tires set up and for the drivers to choose what tires they are going to use during the return to the Brickyard 400 this year. Because remember, the Brickyard 400 is coming back in 2024. Now, Denny Hamlin was a little hopeful of the racing, but he also says that dirty air is going to be prevalent in this event. And we're going to see some shifting from what we understand from the test. Now, during this test, there was a pretty notable moment, and that is Kyle Busch crashing. Kyle Busch crashed going into turn number 2 and backed it into the outside wall on the driver's side door. Luckily, Kyle Busch was able to get out of his car, and it seems like he's okay and good to go. A tough break for Kyle Busch, who's obviously had a really, really bad last few weeks. Darlington did not go so well. He had a bad performance, got in the outside wall, and also crashed in the truck race on lap number 2. Also, of course, he had issues in the Coke 600, where he did recover to get a top 15. Then he had issues last week at Gateway, where he lost his temper with Kyle Larson, who crashed out of that event, where I think he's at more fault, to be honest now. And then, of course, what happened in Norfolk a couple weeks ago, where he got in the fight with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I really do feel bad for Kyle Busch for the struggles recently, but maybe this test will light a fire under his ass, where he can go out there and perform. So I remember Brad Keselowski having that testing crash. I think it was at Road America, Road Atlanta, and the next week, he went to victory lane. So we'll see what ends up happening there. But I really hope the race Indy can be good because I'm excited for the Brickyard to come back this year. But I am very worried, like some are saying, I am very worried that the racing product is generally not going to be very, very good. Again, I'm hopeful that I'm wrong because I want the racing product to be very, very good at Indy. But I am glad to see that they at least are doing some testing there to make sure the racing product can end up being very, very good. We'll see what ends up happening, and we hope that the racing can be very good at Indianapolis later this year. Hopefully it can end up being very good, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kevin Harvick. Now, Kevin Harvick teased on right before the race began at Gateway that he had a big racing announcement that was going to be coming. And he said it was going to be announced on the Happy Harvick Hour podcast. Well, Kevin Harvick did make an official announcement that he is actually going to be returning to racing once again in 2024, as he is going to be running some late model races with Kevin Harvick Incorporated, I believe, in the Cars Late Model Tour. He is going to run at Five Flags Speedway and also is going to be driving at North Wilkesboro later this year, which he had teased he'd been looking to do that on Twitter, I think about a week or two ago, when they postponed the races from North Wilkesboro. Kevin Harvick did make his return to racing earlier this year, basically, of course, doing practice for Kyle Larson. But it's really awesome to see that he's going to be driving for Kevin Harvick Incorporated. Unlike what he's driven for the last 5 or 6 years, which, of course, have been Fords, he will be driving in a Chevrolet, which is very interesting because Kevin Harvick did, of course, start with Chevys back in the day. I think it's really awesome that Kevin Harvick is getting back behind the wheel. We've got Clint Boyer coming out of retirement to race with Spire in a couple weeks at Nashville. So why not give Kevin Harvick a chance and opportunity to get back behind the wheel? Because I think that Kevin honestly could do a very solid and good job with KHI. Kevin, obviously, with the Cars Late Model Tour, he does have ownership stake in that. So it makes a lot of sense why he is getting the chance and opportunity to drive in this series. And I think that Kevin could honestly go out there and win, even for a driver who's almost 50 years old. I think that Kevin could still be very, very competitive. So this is really just phenomenal and incredible and really awesome to see. So again, I'm very excited about this. I'm looking forward to seeing him get a chance and opportunity to run the late models at Five Flags Speedway. I'm looking forward to this. And it's just cool to see, like I said, that Kevin Harvick is coming out of retirement to race once again. So I'm excited about this for Kevin, and I'm glad to see that Kevin Harvick is officially coming out of retirement to race at Five Flags Speedway later this season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brennan Queen. As it was announced yesterday that Brennan Queen will drive the one truck for Tricon Garage for 2 more races in 2024. He'll race at Nashville, which is the next Truck Series race, and then he'll race at Kansas in October. Brennan Queen, for those who do not know, did make his NASCAR Truck Series debut a couple weekends ago at North Wilkesboro and was the fastest truck on the racetrack at one point. I believe ended up finishing in 3rd or 4th place. But he got the biggest standing ovation. And he was someone that I was really hoping would get another chance and opportunity to drive for this organization. And I really hope if he does well enough in these 2 races, which certainly of how fast this truck has been, I think he could end up going full-time with this team in 2025. But the big question is going to be, because I don't think he's ran a lot of the bigger ovals, will he form very well? Because we know his bread and butter is racing on short tracks and the shorter ovals. This is not his bread and butter. This is definitely a different type of track. But I do believe that he's got a really great chance and strong opportunity right now to be very, very competitive here. And I would not be surprised or shocked if he goes and wins Nashville. It's a really good track for Tricon. They've been very fast the last few years there, and we've seen the speed from Toyotas in recent seasons. So just really cool opportunity for him. I'm glad to see that he's coming back behind the wheel. And again, I'm looking forward to see that Brennan Queen is officially making his comeback in return with Tricon Garage at Nashville and Kansas later this year. Really awesome and great opportunity for him overall. Good to see him get the chance and opportunity to make a return once again in the Truck Series. I think he could honestly go out there and win later this season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Cindric. Now, Austin Cindric was being interviewed after winning the NASCAR Cup Series race at Gateway, and he says, talking about motivation and basically talking about his future in NASCAR a little bit. He says if he's not motivated and if he's not running well, he is not having fun. And this win at Gateway, because he picked up his 2nd career NASCAR Cup Series victory at Gateway, this, in my opinion, has probably taken him off the hot seat. Austin Cindric has been in that 2 car of the last 2 or 3 years, but personally, I don't think Austin Cindric is overall a very bad driver. I think he's just had a lot of bad luck in his name, unfortunately, and just hasn't had a lot of great performances. But again, I contribute that a lot to Team Penske. Joey Logano has been struggling a bit so far this year, and even though he did have a really good run this past weekend at Gateway, he is still currently outside of the playoffs, and Ryan Blaney right now is only 47 points above the cutoff line. So Ryan Blaney has, while he's been the best Penske driver, he's not really been setting the world on fire, unfortunately, this season. So I truly do believe that this win is going to motivate Austin to really step up, because after he won the Daytona 500, he really started having a good season and nearly made it to the round of 8 in 2022. We also can't forget that a few years ago in 2020 and 2021, he tore it up in Xfinity, and I remember those road course races he ran in a 33 car and was really, really good. I just feel like he's had been unmotivated. Well, not unmotivated, but he's had a lot of bad luck, unfortunately, and I think it's affected his confidence, sadly. So I really hope Cindric can start really turning the corner, and that confidence can really start building once again, because like I've already mentioned and said, I think he is a very talented race car driver who can get the best out of equipment, and we're going to road course track, so maybe we can see him really start stepping up to the plate and doing an excellent and really good job going forward. We'll see what ends up happening, and we'll see if he ends up running very, very well going forward and continue to turn that performance around going forward into the foreseeable future with Team Penske, because I think it takes him off the hot seat currently at the moment. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Weatherman. As it was announced yesterday that Kyle Weatherman has received a $25,000 fine for, I think, actions detrimental stock car racing or against a member code of conduct. Now, why did Kyle Weatherman receive a $25,000 fine? Well, there was contact on pit road, and it was reported by Bob Pockets that apparently there was contact between Ryan Sieg and Kyle Weatherman on the racetrack, and it escalated on the pit road. Now, Kyle Weatherman did send a video message out last night apologizing to his sponsors and everybody, which made me a bigger fan because he had the balls to admit that he made a big mistake. And I've always been a big fan of Kyle Weatherman. He said, unfortunately, he had a lot of things going on recently that I'm not going to get into, unfortunately. But man, Kyle Weatherman, he just made a mistake. It's egregious that he ran in the back of somebody on pit road. It is unacceptable. And unfortunately, I didn't really even know this incident happened because there weren't a lot of cameras out on the racetrack, unfortunately, with it being a standalone event. There weren't a lot of cameras that were out on the racetrack. So obviously, no one was able to see it, unfortunately. But $25,000 is a big fine, especially for a smaller team and organization. I'm glad to see that he admitted his mistake, and I'm just glad to see overall that he was able to admit that he made a big and huge mistake overall. So it sucks to see for sure. I really wish it didn't end up happening for him, but at the same token, at the same time, it does take someone into courage to go ahead and admit that you made a big mistake. So really unfortunate situation there. I do expect they're not going to appeal this fine. I do expect it'll get paid, and I really hope that he can get better from this and not make any more mistakes going forward. But I'm also hoping Kyle can get better and things can get better for him going forward in his life. So really unfortunate situation overall there, and I'm glad to see that he did take responsibility for having the incident on the racetrack with the people involved, including Ryan Sieg, and he apologized to his sponsors and everybody in NASCAR and the fans involved. Glad to see that he admitted he made a mistake. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the 8 trademark. As it was reported by Brickyard, a fellow NASCAR YouTuber, Motorsports YouTuber, that the 8 trademark has officially lapsed. According to him, Teresa Earnhardt has let the number 8 trademark officially lapse. And Dale Jr. and his group of people apparently are in talks to potentially file for that number 8 trademark. Now, according to what it says, it could take till 2025. And he commented on as well on the Dale Jr. download, which is the Dirty Air episode earlier last night. This is a really, really huge story. Teresa has held on to the 8 trademark for a very, very long time. And the fact that she has let the 8 trademark lapse, and he says that his understanding, Teresa has not filed and tried to refile once again for the 8 trademark. And we know Dale Jr. is interested in getting that trademark back. And personally, I think a lot of people want to see it back for many, many reasons. It's personal to them. We've been following this story for many, many years, all the way back to 2007. Ricky Rackman and Rutledge Wood basically did a thing to try to set free the 8. And there were people that made signs, including even fellow YouTuber Jared Lundberg, made a sign back in 2007. And I think this is a really, really huge deal that the 8 trademark has lapsed away from Teresa, which means it's basically free at this point. And the fact that Dale Jr. can now swoop up if he wants to and use it for his personal stuff, I think is absolutely huge. And unlike Teresa, Dale Jr. is probably going to put this into good use. It's going to take some time for it to be officially picked up, but I do expect that Dale Jr. is eventually going to get it, but it's going to take some time for it to officially come back. I think this is absolutely amazing to see, though. I'm really happy that Dale Jr. is finally going to get the 8 trademark. It's a really, really huge deal, and just so happy and so grateful to see this because I've been waiting for this for way too long. I've been wanting to see this, and now it's official that Dale Jr. is finally going to get the chance and opportunity to finally get the 8 trademark back in his hands, which I think a lot of people really wanted to see from the get-go. Happy to see the 8 trademark will officially be back in Dale Jr.'s hands in the future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Busch Light crash. As it was put out on a tweet by Chris Myers last night saying, would anybody be interested in having the Busch Light crash at Bowman Gray Stadium in February in 2025? This is not the first time we've heard this, and if Chris Myers is saying something, it usually means it's very, very true. Chris Myers put out that tweet about there not being a race on Easter more than likely last year, and also put that tweet out about there likely not being a race in California next year in 2025, well, Southern California, I should say. Obviously, we talked about this, but there's been a lot of rumors and rumblings that Bowman Gray Stadium could host a clash in 2025. Now, obviously, I've got my opinions on this. I think that Bowman Gray should be the All-Star race going forward, but we do know that North Wilkesboro is going to be hosting the All-Star race once again. I really am interested to see how a race at Bowman Gray Stadium is going to be. But one of my biggest problems is the weather. Now, granted, sometimes it can get warm in North Carolina, or it can get into 50s and 60s. But here's the big issue. It gets really cold in the winter in North Carolina in February. I think the average temperature for a night is like in the 30s or even the upper 20s. But sometimes you get those races where it's in the 40s and 50s. And people are saying you're not going to fill up the stands. Trust me. If you have a race at Bowman Gray, a cup race especially, you're going to have people that are going to tune in, and a lot of people are going to show up especially. Because the track only hosts 17,000. I don't think they're planning to add a lot of seats. I think that it is a good move instead of going out to Mexico or wherever, even though we're expected to go to Mexico City or Montreal next year. It is good that they're not going to be traveling out west and going pretty far. So I think it's going to make the teams a lot happier. But will it make the fans a lot happy? Because Bowman Gray Stadium does have a really big reputation. And even though NASCAR has taken over ownership in recent months and weeks, basically because we all expected this was going to happen, I think that the racing product may not be that great. But I do hope the racing product can be great and we don't see a lot of the chaos we see on a weekly basis at the tracks. There's always a lot of chaos. There's always videos of surface, and we see a lot of the chaos there. It is called the Madhouse for a reason, even though it does have a very negative reputation. Do I want to see it Bowman Gray? I mean, the only other option they've got is Daytona, right? And I think a lot of people are tired of the scene going to Daytona. So I could see them going to Bowman Gray next year, but Daytona is also an option, according to Jordan Bianchi earlier the last month or so. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, but it sounds like if Chris Myers is reporting on something because he works really high at Fox Sports, you know it's very likely and very true. So we're expecting it's going to be back next year, or not back there, but it's expected to go to Bowman Gray. It probably will be announced in the not-so-distant future. We're still waiting on the schedule to be released, but it sounds like the schedule is not too far down the road from being released. We've had some announcements. We know Atlanta's going to be the first race on TNT. We know some of the race on TNT, and of course Prime. We know the Coke 600 is going to be on Prime next year. So we'll see what happens going into the future. But right now, a lot of rumors suggest that Bowman Gray Stadium might be making a comeback to NASCAR and might be the clash in 2025. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Mike Joy. As it was reported by Adam Stern last night that Mike Joy intends to return to the Fox Sports booth in 2025. Mike Joy at the start of 2025 is going to be 75 years old, and there were rumblings, rumors, and speculation that Mike Joy was going to be retiring at the end of the 2024 season and let Adam Alexander take over starting in 2025. But Mike Joy making a decision here to come back, I'm really happy to see this. I don't think Mike Joy is personally the problem. Mike Joy, even though he's 74, 75 years old, Mike Joy is still really, really good. But I am also, to the same token, surprised that he's basically still wanting to continue. And I think that he should go more in the Chris Myers role and have Adam Alexander take over. But at the same token, at the same time, like I mentioned and said, Mike Joy has never been the problem at Fox Sports. He's always still really, really good. I think the big problem you have at Fox right now is the production and the quality of these racing broadcasts. The quality just has not been very, very good on the racing broadcasts in recent years and recent seasons. But I think Mike Joy is one of the greatest commentators ever, lead commentators. I think he's better than Ken Squire personally. I know that probably sounds blasphemous, but I grew up with Mike Joy. And I think Mike Joy still is very good at what he does, even around at 75. He basically is just got someone who could tell a lot of a lot of amazing and great motorsports stories. And I think he's going to continue doing that going into next year. And I think with him and Kevin Harvick, Clint Bowyer, I don't expect Kevin Harvick and Clint Bowyer that they're going to be leaving the Fox Sports booth at the end of the year, so it's probably going to be the same lineup. The question is going to be who else is going to be with Fox, because there's going to be some changes coming next year with these broadcasts, because remember, Amazon and TNT are coming in. NBC is already making changes. Rick Allen's not going to likely be back with NBC next year. We know Lee Divvy's probably going to be covering NASCAR races next year. Jimmy Johnson's probably going to go full-time in that booth. I could see Steve Letarte and Jeff Burton, all of them moving over to Amazon next year, though I do think Carl Edwards or Kurt Busch could be in the running to go to Amazon, considering that Carl Edwards is interested in returning. And Kurt Busch, I think, was a really solid broadcaster. I think Alan Bestwick can make a comeback. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how broadcast silly season plays out, which I think we're getting really close to finding out stuff in that front. But going back to Mike Joy, he's one of the best ever. He's still good at what he does, and I think he's going to continue being good at what he does going forward into the future. So I'm really excited about this, that Mike Joy is coming back next year, as I think he deserves another year. But how much longer is he going to do this, right? Because like I already mentioned, Mike Joy is getting a lot older. I personally think Mike Joy's probably got at most 2 to 3 years left before he hangs up the helmet as a commentator. I could be wrong, and Mike Joy does this for another 4 or 5 years. But personally, I think Mike Joy's only got a few years left as a lead commentator in NASCAR, but he's still really, really good at what he does, and he does an excellent job overall. So I'm very excited to see this. I'm very glad that Mike Joy is returning. I think he's got a few more years left at best, but I think it's a really good decision. He's still one of the best ever, and I think he's personally a first-ballot Hall of Famer. If he is eligible for the Hall of Fame, please put him in, because he should be in the NASCAR Hall of Fame, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Junior Motorsports. There's always been this talk and conversation about Junior Motorsports joining the Cup Series, and it's been going on since all the way back in 2021. Now, Dale Jr. yesterday on that same Dirty Air episode, we talked about the trademark, that him and Kelly are still on the table for a charter going into the future. Now, originally Dale Jr. did say that basically they did say they originally just wanted to bring their whole Cup Series team up altogether. But now recently they've kind of changed their tune around an investment. Now, Dale Jr. did confirm on this episode something we've heard, that they are not buying a charter from Stewart-Haas Racing. We do know that 2 of the other organizations that are buying a charter, Front Row is confirmed to be one of those organizations, which will be a 3-car team next year. And 23LM Racing and Trackhouse are expected to also buy a charter going into 2025. And a lot of people are linking RCR to that 4th charter, but Rick Ware and Call could also be in the running as well. As for Junior Motorsports potentially joining the Cup Series, I think a lot of us do want to see it, right? I think Junior Motorsports being a Cup would be a really good thing for the sport, because Dale Jr., even though he's been retired now for the last 4 or 5 years, last 6, 7 years, I should say, at least full time, Dale Jr. is still the biggest name in NASCAR today, even bigger than the guys like Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, and Bubba Wallace, and also Kyle Busch. He's still the biggest household name, even 6 or 7 years later. And that's the thing you got to look at, is if Junior Motorsports jumps up the Cup, Dale Jr.'s team will be the most popular organization in NASCAR. And I think we've all been wanting it to happen. That's why we've been speculating it for so long. But I talk about the possibility of an investment coming into play, because charters are going to cost around $20, $25 million. And the other big thing you got to think about as well is this charter deal is still not finalized at this moment. So we're still waiting on that charter deal to get finalized and get done. But let's say if Junior Motorsports does finally make the jump up the Cup in the not-so-distant future, who could they end up getting? Well, I think you got to start looking at the drivers who currently drive for Junior Motorsports. You've got Sam Mayer. Sam Mayer's been linked as a driver who could move up to the Cup Series next year. And Sam Mayer's obviously a very talented race car driver who's got 5 career wins, including earlier this year at Texas Motor Speedway. So he certainly is an option of someone that could move up going to next year. You've got Brandon Jones. Brandon Jones has Menards money, but I also think that Brandon Jones, he really has just not been doing a really great job this year with Junior Motorsports, so I could see him being out at the end of this year. You've also, of course, have guys like Justin Allgaier and Sammy Smith, too. But then you've got someone like Connor Zillage, who I think could make a couple starts, and even Carson Quaffle as well. I think it's going to be very, very interesting to let it play out. And then also you've got drivers like Matt Benedetto and Kyle Weatherman who could be options as well, or even Anthony Alfredo, because they do have ties with Hendrick. Now, obviously, with the charter and the grandfather rule potentially coming in, Hendrick would have to give up their ownership stake in the team if they were to move up the cup, but I think Rick Hendrick would easily do that to make sure that Dale Jr. got the chance and opportunity to move up the cup. I think there is a chance it does happen this year. I know I said it wasn't going to happen like a week or two ago, but things can change very, very quickly. And I think the fact that Dale Jr. continues to change his tune on this front tells me he's starting to be a little more interested. And the more open he gets, the more likely it does end up happening. And I think that Dale Jr. buying a Cup Series team or getting in the Cup Series, like I said, would be really, really huge for the sport. Because I think Junior Motorsports being Cup is something I think all of us really, really want. The question is it really going to happen at this point? To be honest, like I said, I don't know, right? That's the big thing. I don't know. I want to see Junior Motorsports move up. I think we all really do. But the question is, will Dale Jr. move up? To be honest, I am not entirely sure if it is going to end up happening. So we'll see what happens and see if it ends up happening. But right now, I'm not sure if Junior Motorsports is going to move up to the Cup, at least for the foreseeable future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, I did a video talking about this yesterday, but it was officially confirmed that Kyle Larson has officially received a playoff waiver and will still remain playoff eligible going into 2024. The reason Kyle Larson was needing a playoff waiver was because he did miss the Coco 600. It did not complete a lap at all. And according to NASCAR's rules, you are required to race in every single points-paying event unless authorized by NASCAR. Now, there were some interesting comments that came out from the press conference yesterday that Ellen Sawyer did with the media. He says they're not planning to make any changes to waiver policy currently at the moment, but they could make changes during the offseason to the waiver policy going forward. He basically also confirmed a big reason why Kyle Larson did receive a waiver, and it's because he tried to get to Charlotte Motor Speedway and was on the pit box ready to go to get inside the race car. And he basically said that the Indy 500 is a different occasion, which he also did confirm that that's a big reason why he did receive a waiver as well. NASCAR did make the right decision here. Imagine if the guy who's currently second in the points, Kyle Larson, had not received a waiver. Well, there would have been a lot of massive and major repercussions here. Number one, the guy that was second in the points would have not been able to compete for a championship. And it would have made no sense for people being told that the guy second in the points would have not been able to race for a championship because he missed one race. Now, apparently, there were internal discussions and people that were really not very happy, which tells me that there was a lot of very insecure people that really were just jealous of Kyle Larson running the Indy 500. Well, guess what? I hate to break it to those people that are insecure in the industry, but the Indy 500 is a much bigger race than the Coca-Cola 600. It's the biggest of the three races that are run on the same day. And another reason that this was a great decision by NASCAR is because it will now let drivers who want to do the double get the chance to run the double. There's a lot of drivers very interested in doing the Indy NASCAR double. We know that Kyle Busch wants to do it next year. We know that Ryan Blaney and Scott McLaughlin are interested. Joseph Newgarden is interested. Tyler Reddick is interested. We know that Justin Marks is interested in getting a team in there. We probably think SVG could run it next year if he wanted to. We know a lot of drivers are very interested. If they would have stopped this from happening, this would have discouraged drivers from going ahead and doing the double. The double is a really good thing for the sport. And they said they like the Indy 500 and they like the double. And I think that NASCAR really realized that if they made the wrong decision, blessed people would tune in. They basically even said that not having Kyle Larson in playoffs would have not made any sense. Now, why it took them this long to make the decision is absolutely mind-boggling to me. This is a decision that should have come much sooner than it ended up coming. And I think it's very frustrating to see it took this long for NASCAR to make the decision. But I am very happy to see that NASCAR came to the right decision and the right conclusion here, because they absolutely needed to come to the right conclusion, and I think they absolutely did that. So I'm glad they came to the right decision. They made the right call here. I think it's a really good decision they made, and I'm glad to see that Kyle Larson will get to run for the playoffs, which he absolutely should never have been unplayoff eligible to begin with. I'm glad to see we're finally done with this drama, and I'm very happy that Kyle Larson has officially received a playoff waiver, and we can now move on from his situation. Glad to see that Kyle Larson has officially received the playoff waiver that he should have gotten in the first place. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR silly season once again. Now, Bob Poggers put up a really good article in regards to NASCAR silly season around the future of the SHR drivers among some very other interesting things. Let's begin with the big stuff. The biggest thing that's noted is that Joe Gibbs Racing is waiting on Martin Truex Jr.'s decision on whether or not he is going to retire at the end of this year or come back in 2025. Bob actually asked Martin Truex Jr. if he is coming back in 2025, and Martin is still waiting on a decision. And we're not entirely sure if we're going to know about Martin's decision, whether that is in May or June or whenever it is, but Joe Gibbs Racing really wants a decision done very, very soon. Now, Bob mentioned some very interesting names that could be in the running to go to Joe Gibbs Racing next year. One of those is Chase Briscoe. Chase Briscoe has been really, really tied with Ford. We'll get back to that in just a second, but Chase Briscoe could be a candidate if Martin Truex Jr. ends up retiring. Eric Jones is another candidate. Eric Jones, of course, formerly drove for Joe Gibbs Racing back in 2000 and from 2000 for many, many years, drove the 20 car and unfortunately left team go to Legacy, but he's been tied with Toyota for many years. So he could come back there if it ends up retired. And then also Eric Almirola and Chandler Smith are other names that have been mentioned from the Athletic as potential candidates. You've also got Noah Gragson. Noah Gragson's really heavily tied with Bass Pro Shops, and obviously, of course, the Bass Pro Shops money could stick around next year, though Kroger is expected to go over there in 2025 to the team. Now, let's talk about Chase Briscoe once again. Chase Briscoe, more than likely, is the lead candidate to take over the 21 car for the Wood Brothers. So while he could go to JGR, I could also see Chase Briscoe going over to the Wood Brothers. And it sounds like most likely that's what's going to happen, meaning that Harrison Burton, more than likely, is going to be out at the end of the year. Speaking of Noah Gragson's in the running for multiple organizations. Joe Gibbs Racing and Richard Childress Racing, even Front Row as well. RCR is an organization that is looking to expand going into 2025, and they're that team that could be the team that's looking to get that fourth charter. Obviously, we know Kyle Busch is returning to Richard Childress Racing in 2025, and we know that Austin Dillon has signed a multi-year extension to drive the 3. I know Junior mentioned there were rumors of Noah going to the 3, but Austin Dillon has signed a multi-year extension. So we are expecting that Noah, if they was to expand, he go to a third RCR car. But there's also that rule of the grandfather rule coming in, which means he wouldn't be able to go to a team like Front Row if they do expand a 3-car operation like they're going to end up being next year. Speaking of potential drivers that could go to Front Row, Josh Berry might have a harder time finding a cup ride next year, but I do believe that Josh Berry more than likely is going to end up at Front Row Motorsports in a third Front Row car. Josh Berry's got the funding and sponsorship a little bit with him, and I think him and Rodney Childers are very highly coveted. So I think those two guys will end up over at Front Row next year. Let's talk about Ryan Preece. Ryan Preece is going to have a very difficult time finding a riding cup. I think most likely he's back in Xfinity next year or going back to late models. As much as I want to see him continue racing in Cup next year, I think he ends up going back to late models or goes to Xfinity Series with that SHR Xfinity program or whatever Xfinity program is going to be around in some sort of capacity next season. Let's talk about Cole Custer and Riley Herbst. Cole Custer is the favorite currently for the 34 car, and many expect that he is going to Front Row Motorsports. And it sounds like what I know Brickyard mentioned in his video, but it sounds like the Haas Automation might be sticking around and working with them next year at Front Row Motorsports. And he's a favorite for the 34. Now, Riley Herbst, he's got a couple options going into next year. It sounds like he's a candidate for one of the 2311 racing cars for next year, but also Front Row or Rick Ware could be an option. I think most likely that he ends up with Rick Ware Racing in 2025, but in that 15 car full time. We know he's driven for Rick Ware in the past, drove for them earlier this season, so he might end up there in 2025. But you've now go to 2311 Racing. Corey Heim is the current favorite to go to 2311 Racing in that third 2311 car. I know Kurt Busch has been rumored maybe come back at one point, but Corey Heim is the front runner. Carl Edwards, of course, also confirmed he's not coming back to racing. I thought maybe he could come back if he did come back, but it sounds like Corey Heim is the front runner. But Riley Herbst is also an option with the monster money. But I think that they're going to come to their senses and go with Corey Heim next year if they do expand. Now let's go to Trackhouse Racing. Trackhouse is in a very big dilemma going into next year. It sounds like they're having a difficult choice between SVG and Zane Smith. Now, Shane Van Gisbergen has been performing a lot better as the year has gone on in Xfinity, and he just picked up his first career NASCAR Xfinity Series victory at Portland this past weekend. Meanwhile, Zane Smith is currently 34th in the standings. If Trackhouse Racing is only going to be a 3-car team next year, it sounds like Zane Smith could be the odd man out. But I think Zane Smith would end up at Kaulig Racing next year, meaning that Shane Van Gisbergen would go to a third full-time car. Shane's got sponsorship from Red Bull and WeatherTech, among other companies, and I think Trackhouse will be making a lot of sense. Daniel Suarez is expected to sign a multi-year extension with the team, and Ross Chastain is not going anywhere anytime soon. So I do expect that if Trackhouse is to expand a 3-car team next year, which sounds like they're going to, I do believe that Shane Van Gisbergen is going to end up being the driver taking that seat over Zane Smith. Zane Smith goes to Kaulig Racing next year because Kaulig is in the running to expand, but I think that they're going to be a 2-car team, and I think it'll likely be Zane Smith and Daniel Hemrick. As for RCR, like I mentioned, it sounds like RCR is going to potentially expand as well next year to a 3-car operation if they get a third charter. Now, Ricker Racing is another operation that is in the driver market situation. Who could they get next year? Well, they've got, of course, I mentioned Riley Herbst. Ryan Preece is an option. I also think Matt DiBenedetto could be an option next year for that seat. Even Haley Deegan could be an option next year. But if they do just want one full-time driver in the seat, I think either Casgrove or Riley Herbst are the most likely options. But I do mention Haley Deegan because she does have the monster backing and sponsorship as well. And finally, let's talk about some other notable drivers part of this situation. You have Austin Hill, Chandler Smith, Sam Mayer, and Christian Eckes as other drivers that are mentioned by Pop Pockrass. Austin Hill could be a candidate for that RCRC if Noah Gragson does go over to Joe Gibbs Racing next year. But Austin Hill, I think, needs another year in Xfinity, and he does have a 2-year deal to drive the 21 car next year. So I think Austin Hill could end up driving for this team in 2025 and stay in Xfinity. But it will only be going to Cup there. Chandler Smith is a front runner, of course, to go over to the 19 car next year, and I think he's the most likely option. But it's interesting that Eric Jones, Noah Gragson, and Chase Briscoe are mentioned as potential options for the 19 next season. Sam Mayer has been linked to Kaulig Racing for 2025, to my understanding, and has been linked to other organizations. If Junior Motorsports is to move up next year, he could end up being linked there. And finally, Christian Eckes. This is a new name on the silly season market that really hasn't been mentioned at this moment. I think Christian Eckes is linked to Kaulig Racing next year. He was linked to the 2-car last year for silly season. He's been doing a really good job in trucks. And we've been seeing a lot of the Truck Series drivers moving up in recent years. It's going to be very interesting to see how silly season plays out. We're still waiting on the charter agreement to come through. Going back to JGR, I think that more than likely Mark Truex Jr. is going to return next year. And I think when you look at SVG, I think he's going to take the Trackhouse seat full-time and Zane's going to go to Kaulig. We'll see how it ends up happening, and we'll see how it plays out throughout the rest of silly season. So, that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow my Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support my Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's video. Do you think SVG is going full-time Cup racing next year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And where do you think Noah Gragson ends up? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today on the channel, we'll have the NASCAR Xfinity Series race picks for Sonoma. Tomorrow on the channel, we'll have Cup race picks for Sonoma. And we'll also, of course, have the paint scheme video of any major news breaks throughout the rest of the week. We'll talk about it on the channel. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. And I'll see you guys next time for more awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.